Welcome back. We're going to finish up chapter 10 by talking about probation and parole. So we talked about intermediate sanctions in the last class and what are some of the different intermediate sanctions that exist. So now we're specifically going to talk about probation and parole to finish up chapter 10. So let's get to it. Let me get started here. Should have done this already. Sorry. Okay. So when you're talking about intermediate sanctions, another intermediate sanction is probation. Okay. And then we're going to lump parole into this also. So there's a quote that Daryl Gates, he was the chief of police for LA, once said, "Nobody gets rehabilitated." Well, I shouldn't say no one. Some of them die. And that was his quote. And I have a question. Do you think that's true? Do you think that we are able to rehabilitate certain people if they commit crimes? If you don't think you can ever rehabilitate people, then maybe you don't care about any of these intermediate sanctions. But if you think there is a chance to rehabilitate people, then you want to consider some of these intermediate sanction options. Okay. So let's define what some of these options are. So the first one is, what is probation? So probation is when a person is given a sentence. So you are sentenced to 5 years in prison, but the judge suspends that sentence and says, instead of making you spend it in a prison, we're going to let you stay in the public, in your house, have your job, have your children, and you have to report to a probation officer or somebody to supervise you and make sure you don't commit any more crimes during that time period. Okay, so what crimes do you think should actually get probation? Well, a lot of people would think it was only for the smallest amounts of crime. And in fact, it's used for all different types of crimes, even felonies, even violent crimes. Sometimes people get probation. So don't exclude it for any type of crime, because all different people can be eligible for probation. Now, when you're talking about probation, you want to understand that there are what we call probation conditions. If somebody's placed on probation, that person has to satisfy or meet certain conditions that the judge imposes. Now, there's certain general conditions that every single probationer has to follow, no matter what. They're just standard that all people on probation must follow. You have to check in with your probation officer every once in a while, whatever time period that they set. You can't commit any more crimes. You have to either be working or have a job. So there's certain general conditions that all people have to meet on probation. But there are some special conditions that also can be imposed. And these are usually based on the crime that was committed. So if somebody's charged with a particular crime, like maybe they somehow did something to a child, one of your special conditions is that you can't be around children. So special conditions are often based on the crime that was committed. So everybody's going to follow the general conditions, and then the judge will evaluate the crime that's being that was committed and make up any special conditions that would go along with that crime. So let's use this as an example. Alice Mayer was convicted of drunk driving, which is her second offense. The judge sentences her to probation. Thus, she has to abide by the general conditions of probation. So what are the general conditions? We already talked about that. You have to report. So how often would we make her report? Maybe just once a month. Okay. She has to not leave the jurisdiction. She has to stay working or have a job or go to school. So those would be some of the general conditions. But based on her offense, we may give her special conditions. She cannot use alcohol at all. She has to show up for an alcohol sobriety test every week. She's not allowed in any bars or restaurants or establishments that sell alcohol. She can't drive. She has to turn over her keys and license. She's not allowed to drive. So you can see that they may have different conditions. Sometimes they put the breathalyzers on the car. If they're going to let you drive, then there's a breathalyzer on your car that you have to blow into every time you're going to drive. Okay, so those would be some of the different conditions that could be imposed. And if the person is going to be on probation, they have to meet those criteria. Now, parole. How is parole different than probation? Well, parole is when the person actually does go to prison. So you are sentenced and you actually spend some time in prison. Parole is when they let you out early and they're going to supervise you now in the community. So you get parole, you get to leave prison early and spend the rest of your time in the community, but you still are supervised just like you would be with probation. Now, there's two different ways that people can get parole. Some states have what's called parole boards. So once somebody has completed a certain percentage of their sentence, then it goes in front of the parole board, and then the parole board will determine if they think you should get parole. Sometimes states have what's called statutory decrees, which means after you've served a certain amount of your sentence, you automatically get released onto parole. So sometimes the decision is made by parole board, sometimes it's already made by statute. So you would have to know what your state does in that situation. We have parole boards in New York State. Now, just like with probation, you have parole conditions too. And same thing, you have general and specific conditions that are placed on parole. Okay, so you have to meet those certain conditions, just like probation. What happens if you don't meet those conditions? Then your parole is considered violated. And you can have this for probation too. You can have a probation violation. If you violate the conditions, then you can have your probation or parole revoked. Okay, so if you don't follow the conditions, they're going to revoke it. And for probation, you're going to go to prison and serve the sentence that you were given. In parole, you're going to go back and serve the rest of your sentence. So parole revocation is when the judge decides that the violation is severe enough that you need to go back into custody. And that's what we would classify as parole revocation. Now, who decides whether or not there is a parole violation and revocation? Well, the judge decides. And the courts have set out rules for this decision. So in Morrissey versus Brewer, the Supreme Court said, if you are going to revoke someone's parole and send them back to prison, you have to give them written notice saying what they did wrong that violated it. It has to be in writing. You have to provide them with the evidence of that violation. What do you know that's the evidence of that? There has to be a little mini hearing where the judge evaluates the evidence and makes sure that it's a true violation of parole. The defendant is allowed to be at the hearing and present their own evidence of why it should not be revoked. They can cross-examine witnesses and all kinds of stuff. And then the judge has to give a written decision of what they decided. So those requirements were set down in Morrissey versus Brewer. In Gannon versus Scarpetti, the court extended those to probation also. So if you ever are going to have a probation violation and revocation, those are the requirements that must be set before that can occur. Now, what should parole boards consider when granting parole? Well, if you were on the parole board, what would you want to know from the parolee? What kind of things would make you think, yes, we should let this person out early? And what other things would make you say, no, maybe we should not let them out early? So a lot of times, one of the key things are they regretful for what they do? Do they take responsibility for their actions? And are they accepting responsibility? And therefore, they are sorry and feel regretful for it. And that is usually a key feature. Also, what did they do while they were in prison? Did they go to treatment classes? Did they better themselves? Did they get an education? Or were they getting violations, committing more crimes, getting in trouble? So those would all be things that the parole board would consider. So what do you think about this? Kenny Killer was arrested and charged with felony murder. He and his buddy robbed a gas station, and during the crime, his buddy killed the gas attendant. He is now up for parole. He has attended all rehabilitation programs, drug counseling, received his GED, and is a mentor to the new inmates that enter the prison system. He also counsels school children about staying in school and avoiding a life of crime. Would you grant parole? So if you were on the parole board, what would you think? Would you be willing to let him out? So those are the different things you're going to consider whether or not you will let him go back into the community and be supervised under parole. Now, what happens when people get out? And it also is affected by how long were they in there. Now, if you have a relatively short sentence, a year or two, life probably isn't going to change that much for you. But let's think that you do 10 years. So think back 10 years ago. How old were you 10 years ago? How was your life different 10 years ago? So if you went from 10 years ago to now, how many significant changes would have occurred? So all of this goes back to re-entry, okay? And then think about, what if you did 20 years? What if you did 30 years? How would life in society be so different from when you went into prison? And how well are you going to acclimate back into that society? So it's often difficult for inmates to reintegrate back into society. They haven't known that life for so long, and they're used to such the regiment of the prison system. So they have come up with a lot of re-entry strategies, ways to help counsel and work with inmates that are released so that they can make a smooth transition back to society. So what I want to do is I want to show you this little video. This is a man that was released from prison a while after he spent in jail, and basically how different his life was. So let me try to show you this.
On the windows, I ain't never seen nothing like this before. Look, on the windows, you ain't seen nothing on no windows but people walking by, not no video. I told you I stand out here for a long time watching this crazy stuff. Wow, all right. My name is Otis Johnson. I went to prison at the age of 25 years old, and when I came out, I was 69 years old. I went to prison or jail for the crime of attempted murder on a police officer and assault on a police officer. Prison affected me a lot, and my reentry was a little bit hard at first because things had changed. I got out of Times Square and I was looking at the atmosphere, the new things that was happening. I seen that everybody, or majority of the people, was talking to themselves. And then I look closer and they seem to have things in their ears, you know. I don't with them things, with the phone thing, iPhones they call them or something like that. And I thought to my mind, what, everybody that became, you know, CIAs or agents and stuff like that? Because that's the only thing I can think of, somebody walking around with wires in their ears and stuff like that. That's what they had when I was out during the 60s and the 70s. And some people are not even looking where they're going. So I'm trying to figure out how people do that, control themselves to walk and talk on a phone without even looking where they're going and stuff like that. Right. So that was amazing to me.
Yo, so what's the next move? Where do I go? Where do I stay? Where do I work? Where do I rest? Where do I play? It feels as though I've been up in this gridlock for days. Still I'm hoping that this shit stops, but hey, whatever happens.
I remember this when I first got out, I was gonna make a call. Then I seen the the $1 thing. You know, it was what, 25 cents when I got it? I found out when I got on the streets they don't use it. Yes.
It's all changed and I couldn't tell you.
Like I said, I'm used to being by myself. But the majority of the time I like the buses because you see different things and you also communicate with less people. You know, you bumping into people on the train and stuff because that thing is packed. All right, but the bus is not really that packed. Even if it is packed, you know, you still have room enough to, you know, maybe talk to somebody or listen to what's happening with other families on the buses.
Already 20 years old, now that can't be right. Why do I feel like I've already lived half my life?
Being in society is a good feeling, a very good feeling, you know, other than being inside the prison. All right, you only can go outside at certain times. So I like being in the sun and also observing people. It's nice, you know, it's nice to be free. I think in 1998 or something like that, I lost contact with my family. Coming out of prison, right, I was mainly alone. Like I said, I had no birth certificate, nothing like that. I had no family, no girlfriends, no sisters, no brothers, you know, no people that I can communicate that I had years ago. It bothers me a lot because I really miss my family, you know, and wow. I remember I had two nieces, they was twins, right? And every time I come over, they run to me, and one of them used to get behind me and hide, right? And the other one would be looking for the other twin, right? And so sometimes I just move to the side so the twin can see the other twin. And she said, "You crossed me," you know. So I remember that still. I used to love children, you know, and that's one of the good memories I had. Mm-hmm. I eat different things now because I'm looking at all this crazy stuff they got, so I try it out. You know, once in a while, like the funny dinners, different colored drinks. What you call that? The gator stuff, pink, blue, all these different colors. So I start drinking that once in a while. You know, just because it looks funny. There's so many things that you can eat, so it's a hard choice to pick out really the food that you want. For instance, the peanut butter, and it had jelly in it, and I ain't never seen nothing like that before, and definitely wasn't in the prison system, you know. So peanut butter and jelly in the same place in a jar, and that was strange. Still here, 1960s. Skippy's still around. Yeah. When don't have nothing to do, maybe at 6 o'clock at night, you know, I might, since it's nice out, I go out in the park, you know, or I might just meditate. You know, you gotta let things go because holding on to anger will only stagnate your growth and development. You know, a lot of people say, well, the society owed me because I did all this time, even though I did the crime. I don't think like that. I don't feel that society owed me anything. Everything happens for a reason, I believe. So I let that go and deal with the future instead of dealing with the past. I try not to go backwards. I try to go forwards. And that's how I survive society.
Today I'm going to show you how to make the survival
that's
food
the
that
video.
saved America during the Great Depression.
My mouse won't work.
It's long-lasting without refrigeration.
Sorry, my mouse was sticking. So that is the reentry process. So I think it's interesting to see that and understand there are significant challenges even when people actually get out of the prison system. Okay. Now, what are some of the advantages of probation and parole? Well, one of the things why it's really advocated for is because it can lower costs. It's way cheaper to have people supervised at home than it is to have that complete supervision at prison. They can still stay employed. They can help support their family and have community ties. They can make money for restitution to pay back the victims. They may have more increased opportunities for rehabilitation and provide community service to pay back the community. But it also can have disadvantages. Some people may feel that you didn't really have to serve your whole sentence, that you got out easy. And so you didn't really get punished for it. And there is a risk to society by letting you stay in society. You could commit more crimes, which could be problematic. Now, there's a couple other important court cases that deal with probation and parole that I just want to mention. Under Griffin versus Wisconsin, the Supreme Court said probation officers can search a probationer's home without a warrant and without probable cause. So not the police, but a probation officer can show up at a probationee's house and search it without probable cause. In Pennsylvania Board of Probation and Parole versus Scott, the Supreme Court said that the exclusionary rule does not apply at parole revocation hearings. So even if the evidence that the parole officer is using to show revocation, a violation in revocation, the exclusionary rule will not apply. Judges can look at that information. And then the last one, Sampson versus California, the Supreme Court said police can search a parolee's house anytime they want. If you're on parole, you waive your Fourth Amendment rights. So Griffin says a probation officer can search. Sampson says a police officer can search if you're on parole. Okay. Now there's a lot of debate. Should we still have probation and parole? Like I said before, there's a lot of people that feel like that it's letting people off early and it's too much of a risk to society. There was a time when there was really get tough on crime, and a lot of people in some states did away with probation and parole. At the same time, we have very overcrowded prisons. So there may be a bigger push to have probation and parole. So that's what you got to decide. Do you think we should even have it? Now, we said that there are probation officers that supervise the people that are on probation. I posted a little video and it shows a day in the life in a probation officer's job. So you can watch that. What do they basically do? What do probation and parole officers basically do? Probation officers conduct pre-sentence investigations, which means that, remember we said if a person's found guilty of a crime, then there's a sentencing hearing that occurs after. So they are the ones that do the investigation and give the evidence or information to the judge to help the judge determine what the sentence should be. When a person is first put on probation or parole, they'll do an intake procedure where they'll sit down and talk to the parolee or probationer and get general information. They're going to assess that person's needs. So in order for them to be successful, what needs to be provided or how does this person need to be helped? And also to protect society, what do we need to do? So we're going to assess the needs of that. And then we're going to supervise the person while they're on probation and parole and make sure that they are satisfying and fulfilling all of the conditions of probation or parole. Now, when you're talking about this, there's two different philosophies or models that are used in probation and parole. One is the social work model. This is the idea that these are your clients and you really want them to survive and succeed at this. So you're going to assess their needs. You're going to try to provide them with resources. You're going to try to do what's necessary to make them successful. You're going to help them. You are there to help them achieve success. The other model focuses more on corrections. Your job is there to protect society. So you're much more of like an authoritarian over them, making sure you closely supervise them, checking them, making sure they're at work, making sure they're following their conditions. And you would be more willing to report violations if any of the conditions are satisfied. Now, really, to be successful at the job, you have to balance both. They're both really, really important. And it should be an equal balance. A lot of times people tend to be more towards the correctional model, but to really have a successful probation or parole program, you really have to be able to fulfill both of these roles. So do you think there's one more role that's probably been more beneficial than the other? It's just a thinking question. What do you think about it? How would you handle it if you were a probation or parole officer? Now, there are different challenges to the job. Number one, the need to balance these two things, right? The need to balance providing services and helping the person with protecting the community. So reaching that balance can often be difficult. Another issue often is the large caseloads. We have so many people on probation and parole. It's often difficult to supervise everybody and provide all the services that you need to, because there's so many people out there and not enough probation and parole officers. So if you are a probation or parole officer, these are the things that you really have to balance. So I have posted a pre-sentencing investigation. You can look it over and read it and see what you think. Actually, I have it on the next slide too. And you would assess what you think the general conditions and specific conditions should be. So if this was the information that you received and you had to make recommendations to a judge on what you think the general conditions should be and what the specific conditions should be, what would you recommend? So just to get you thinking about the process. Okay. So, and I think that's your homework too for this week. So you can look at it and you'll know what to do for your homework. So that's all I have. I hope you've enjoyed the lecture, and we will come back next week and start talking about actual incarceration. So we'll be moving on to chapter 11 next week. So have a great weekend, and I will see you next week.